can sit by the viola if you want, but it's a little dangerous.
Yeah, I know.
It's especially dangerous.
I think they blow up. I'm not worried.
It may blow up. Anyone play a string instrument in here besides me? Yeah. My seam just like popped right open just now. You can see light through it. It's awesome. It's
You
not
don't
a
want that on
clothing
your
seam.
instrument.
Proving.
Seeing light through it.
Just dorkery, general dorkery. Okay, so you all are here because you love Ravel and Bernard Herrmann.
I do.
This is a really wonderful program that we have for you this evening. It's just really exciting for me, especially just being a member of the orchestra to get to talk to a living composer right here. So we're going to get right to it.
Well, somewhat living.
Somewhat living. We'll see after I'm done with you.
51% or more alive.
Right, that's all it takes, really. I think that's for currency as well.
More than half.
So for those of you that haven't already blown up your Google machine listening to this fabulous concerto, you're really in for a treat. It's on the second half of the program. We're going to just talk about it first, and if you'd like to stay out here the whole time, that's great. If you need to leave, that's cool too. You know, artiste stuff. All right. So I wonder if you could just share a little bit of the inspiration behind the concerto, and including maybe some insight into the title 1111.
Well, I became more and more interested in doing concert music. My first piece was 12 or 13 years ago called Serenata Schizophrenia, and then about 7 years ago I did a ballet for Twyla Tharp, and both of these experiences were just so liberating for me. And we'd been traveling around the world with this show called Elfman Burton, and it's 15 suites of Tim Burton music that I've done for the last 3,500 years with him. And we happened to be in Prague, and Sandy Cameron was the violinist that we have with us in the show because she does a cadenza for Edward Scissorhands. Because for this show, I tried to add bits and pieces to each of the suites that were something not from the score, just to make it more interesting. And the Edward Scissorhands seemed like a natural because it had this gypsy solo. And Sandy and I had met with a Cirque du Soleil show, which I composed the music to. And so she seemed kind of perfectly fit to step out and do this really fun wild cadenza. And they came up after the show and said, would you be interested in writing a violin concerto for Sandy? And as often when in terms of the commissions that I've gotten, first I just go, yes. And then later I go, what does that mean? So my mouth goes first and my brain follows slowly behind, going, maybe you should think about that. Especially the fact that you really don't know what a violin concerto entails. But I'm so hungry for concert work. You know, I'm what you call a concert slut. You know, I'm that one in the bar that, you know, somebody sits next to and go, hi, would you like to what's your hotel number? Well, okay. Because my second commission, I was with Knut Weber with the Berlin Phil, because I've got such a love affair with and I was hoping to get a piece with them. And I went out to lunch, and he was explaining, well, we have a new conductor. We can't do a new commission for you yet, but we ourselves have a group, a piano quartet, and we'd love to have you write a piece. And the same way I just said, yes. And then we had more coffee and we're talking, then I go, I have to ask you, what is a piano quartet? I hope that doesn't mean 4 pianos. So with the violin concerto, oddly, I'd not listened to violin concertos as much as I've listened to and loved the work of Stravinsky, Shostakovich, and Prokofiev. I knew Shostakovich's and Prokofiev's, all their piano concertos, and I'd always been drawn to the piano. And so, looking for new concert work, I was assumed that if I got offered something, it would be a piano concerto, because it's the only instrument I feel a little bit comfortable writing solos for, because I know that even though I'm a horrible pianist, if I can play something slowly, then a great pianist can play it more quickly. But for the violin, I don't know what a violin is capable of doing. But then I began soaking it all up. Sandy got me started. I started with 25 violin concertos, narrowed it down to 15, then 10, then half a dozen, and just to hear what they were. And the more I listened to, the more I was like, oh man, the only thing they all had in common is they were all really hard. Writing for a solo instrument, it's just a whole other thing. And to do it, I didn't want it to be like Elfman writes for film music plus a violin kind of thing, which is, I know what all my critics were going to say automatically, because that's what they tended to say. When I wrote Serenata Schizophrenia in New York, he said, well, it's okay, it's not classical music, but it's like real good film music, and better good film music than bad classical music. So that was the backhanded compliment that I got, because they don't even, I mean, we're at such opposite sides of the spectrum, me and most classical critics. They don't even acknowledge something that's tonal as being contemporary. So automatically, the fact that it was tonal, which was quite intentional, it wasn't a modern piece. And that's a whole other thing, because I've never understood why it's okay if you're influenced. Atonal music started in the 40s, and by the 40s and 50s it was already well established. Why it's okay to go back 70 to 75 years, but not 80. Or 85. No. And that to me is the heart of all the music I love. It's early 20th century classical music. You know, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and that turned my life around when I was 16, 17. And then the first time I heard Prokofiev, I wondered if it's possible that Russian music, that a nationality of music could actually be in DNA, because I'm half Russian in my ancestry, though I have no connections with any of my living relatives that had anything to do with Russia. No Russian was spoken. It was just my great-grandparents, literally. But yet, the music I felt immediately at home with. I felt like this music is in my blood. And so there was just this connection with the Russian musical heritage that appealed to me hugely, and still does. So in the final group of violin concertos that I was listening to, of course, it was both Prokofiev's. It was Leonard Bernstein's Serenata, which I thought was quite outstanding. The Stravinsky Concerto, which I just love, because my favorite piece of Stravinsky is actually a piece called L'Histoire du Soldat, and his violin concerto reminded me of the style, and I think was written not far away, where it felt like it had roots in the same place. But the Shostakovich first was the paralyzing one. And by paralyzing, I mean, it's so amazing to me to hear it, and I listened to it obsessively for about a month, that I almost couldn't start writing when it finally time to start writing, because you reach a point where something becomes a mountain so high, and you realize you could never be that or do that, that keeps you from doing anything. You hit a form of paralysis, and I had to completely shake that from my head. But by that point, I knew what I had to do, and I formed an overall concept of what I wanted to do.
So that is a great story. And
long-winded answer. I'm sorry. I get
but it's
like
wonderful.
this.
I mean, you kind of like, I'm looking at my questions, like you circled us around at number 4.
I'm sorry. Again, my mouth leads, my brain follows.
That's perfect. We're gonna get along great. So. I'm sorry, I'm just old enough, so I'm gonna have to, okay, here we go. So the Shostakovich First Violin Concerto, also 4 movements, just like your concerto.
Well, that was the one thing that I did take away, is 4 movements made sense, but also because I wanted to give it a symmetry. None of my other works had any shape or form to them. They were, if there was 4 movements, they were just 4 different ideas. And, but I wanted this piece to be more disciplined. First, it's the first piece I wrote with the intention of it being played by symphony orchestras, not just a one-off crazy performance with all kinds of difficult electronics and things that had to be done with it. The artistic director of the Royal Scottish National Orchestra, who co-commissioned it, I asked him for the exact breakdown if they were doing a Prokofiev violin concerto or Shostakovich, and he sent it to me. He says, this is our base orchestra, that if we were doing one of those concertos, and I decided I will write exactly for that, and I tried, except...
There seemed to be an enormous amount of percussion.
Yeah. The caveat. I myself am a child of the later 20th century percussion. at one point in my life thought that I would be either an ethnomusicologist or I actually built percussion instruments, and I was such a fan of Terry Riley and early, Philip Glass, Lou Harrison. Harry Parch was a big inspiration to me, which is what got me building my own instruments. If you've never heard of him, Google him and check him out. He was an incredible American, feedback, composer that traveled around almost like a hobo in the 50s. And he built, is this?
I don't understand, Eric. Don't point it at the ground. Okay.
Okay. But at any rate, I did have this love of percussion, so I called him and I said, okay, if it was for your orchestra plus 3 extra percussionists, how would that ride? How would that feel? Because I knew that as you add players, you narrow your chances. Because he warned me, he says, you even add like 6 extra strings, you're going to get cut out of a lot of orchestras. They just don't want to do that. And he said, no, a few extra percussion we could handle. We have kind of an extra percussionist, because when we do big Wagner, certain big pieces, they require extra percussion. So I chomped at the bit, because the first idea, when they offered it to me, that I got excited about, was a cadenza for violin and percussion. So that I just couldn't get out of my head. I wanted to do that because I'd never heard it before, and I just thought that would be really fun. And you'll hear that in the second movement of the concerto tonight.
Fantastic. So the second movement...
I'm sorry, the 4 movements, the symmetry. I knew that I wanted to write something that began and ended, the first and fourth movements, was going to be a little more familiar to someone who knew my music, because I wanted to make sure that my own personality was in the music, and that the second and third movements I can go to the left and to the right and stretch out more. So that was all very intentional before I started. That was the symmetry, and sometimes I'm kind of obsessed with symmetry. So it made sense that there's a connection between 1 and 4, 2 and 3 go off. And I also was carrying always in my mind a warning I got from another musician, a very famous one whose name I won't say, because I'll seem like I'm name dropping.
It's me.
Who said, don't make the mistake other film composers have made when they do classical work, which is just showing how serious they can be, but create work that people who love their music can't find them in. And so I carried that with me always, like, make sure that I'm in here. And so that was also, it was a lot of intentions I was bringing into it, carrying into it.
I have to say that's one of the things that I really appreciate about the concerto is the level of authenticity that you bring, and it totally fits in the concert hall. I mean, it's clear that you're very comfortable writing concert music.
Well, I'm getting comfortable. It's very different. You must realize I've written 100 film scores, 104, but in film music you don't think the same way, because you can have a whole orchestra playing and a clarinet doing a line, and you don't think about it's never played live. You wouldn't reach for your clarinet, you just reach for the clarinet. If you're listening and mixing, I just really need the cello to come out a little more here, you just write the cello up. It's a studio art form. You don't think about live because there's no reason to. It's designed for the studio, and that's how I think. And it wasn't until I started hearing concert suites of some of my film music that I was truly horrified. And I said, I'll never go to these again. It's like, I heard 2 things. I heard Batman and I heard Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and I was horrified both times. And so when I began Elfman Burton, I reorchestrated every piece for the concert stage, because they're not the same. It's a whole different mindset. You really have to make sure, if you have a small group of instruments and you want them to be heard, you've got to orchestrate around that. It's very different. And even this, as I was completing the orchestration, I realized another terrible lesson, which is from listening to all the Prokofiev and Shostakovich. And some of these concertos are very aggressive, and I love that. I love, obviously, you probably, if you know my music, you know I love aggressive writing. And then I went and heard my first live violin concerto at the LA Phil, and it was Sibelius. And I'd listened to that a lot, and the live performance left me in a really weird place, because I couldn't hear a lot of the detail that I heard in the recording. The orchestra was playing much softer, and I missed a lot of detailed violin parts. And then I realized, oh, there's another disconnect. And I asked a few conductors, how do you deal with these Prokofiev pieces live? And he said, it's very difficult. It's really hard to get the violin to express itself above the orchestra. And so, once again, I said, well, that's not right. And so I developed 2 orchestrations for 1111, and one of them is for the acoustic version, which I took almost all the woodwinds out completely, and all the forte sections are more mezzo piano, meaning the loud sections are just below average loud. And that's how you have to do it. And it's fine, but to me, it loses so much of the stuff I really love.
So much color would be missing, and then you had to take a bunch of percussion out too.
Oh, yeah, obviously. And but then I wrote a second version for amplified violin, and of course that's very impure. And my reasoning was simple, as to why shouldn't the experience live on stage be the same as the recording that I heard? Why is it that I could listen to the record and hear everything beautifully, but on stage, I'm getting 2/3 of it? And there is another disconnect. I don't understand why they should be different. So even though a lot of orchestras are like, well, that's horrible, you're amplifying minimally the violin, it's because I'm trying to bring that experience. It's the same, if I'd have done the acoustic version on stage, when I recorded it, I still would have been doing the bigger version, because you can. And hence why Prokofiev and Shostakovich concertos are much fuller in the recordings than if you go and you hear it live, as was the Sibelius even.
Very true, and you mentioned that you heard it in LA, and that's a great hall, Disney Hall, but you know, there's always that extra sort of instrument, which is the space that it's being performed in. And so every hall is going to respond differently to the sounds that you've created here. So have the concerto's been performed in a lot of different spaces. Have you noticed the acoustic really improving or destroying some aspects?
Yeah, I mean, that's always going to be the case, but I already knew that. If you have this is a great hall, by the way, that you have here. This is kind of like pretty perfect. The one orchestra in Europe played it, I won't say who, and they really couldn't play it. They just...
Berlin Philharmonic.
It wasn't the Berlin Philharmonic. But it was, typically when I get a commission, people know my film music and they're expecting me to do that, and then they get the concert work and it's like, oh shit. And so by the performance time, I realized this just is going to be at 50% at best. But they got into the big opera hall. It was played in a big 18th century opera hall. And the acoustics, thank God, were enormous reverb. It made it so forgiving. So when you have a big open hall, it does give a lot of forgiveness.
Right, it's like a law of statistical averages, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the drier the hall, the more clinical it is. Closer to being in the studio. When we were in the studio, everything's bone dry. And it's like everything's under the microscope. Every little imperfection, it's like, ah. And that can be very frustrating, obviously. But this is a great orchestra in a great hall. So I think you'll be very happy tonight.
Yeah, it's gonna rock. We just have a few minutes left, and I'm really curious if there's a viola concerto on the horizon.
No, there's not yet. There's a cello concerto.
I thought you said yes and then thought about it later.
Well, except for the fact I did so much yes that I made a commitment. I'm doing one concert piece per year for the rest of my living days that I could still write. But I suddenly found myself about 4 months ago going, I have 4 commissions over the next year and a half. How did that happen? Or within the next 2 years. And it's like, now it's like, I don't know how to fit a movie in.
You're locked into living. That's not so bad.
Well, except for the fact that I've got to do some films to stay alive, you know. I realize the balance is that the films pay for my ability to do concert work. And that's the beautiful trade-off of sometimes I do films that leave me very frustrated and have a hard time with what I go, but that's going to pay me to do my next symphonic work or concerto. I'm writing a symphonic piece for the Youth Orchestra of Great Britain, which is a wonderful ensemble, 164 musicians on stage. And of course, you know, my commission is $2. It doesn't matter. So to that I owe the movies, which I have to still keep doing. So it's going to be, I was looking at a calendar with my manager just last week. I'm going, I don't know how you're going to do this. I go, I don't know how I am either. At some point, I do have a concerto for percussion and orchestra. That's already in the works for Colin Curry, a wonderful
he's great.
And I have a cello concerto for Gautier, I cannot pronounce his last name, Capricin? Is anybody? Capisson, thank you. And then I have the piece for the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain. And then this October, I have a percussion quartet that Philip Glass asked me to join him. He was doing a work at his festival up in Carmel called the Day and Nights Festival. And for me, if I get a call, something from Philip, it's just, I don't care what it is, it's yes. Because I love Philip. I think he's one of the real 20th century geniuses.
Which, hey, how about that?
We can share.
Thank you. I won't point it at the floor. That's terrible. There we go. So, where are we now then with contemporary music? I mean, we keep using this word classical. It's you can't tell the difference between the uppercase C and the lowercase C. It kind of, colors everything in this weird way. I don't like the word. If anybody has a better one, I'll give you $1. So, contemporary long-form composed music, right? AKA classical music. How are you feeling about its evolution?
Well, I have very mixed feelings. I love music that comes from emotion, comes from the heart. And starting in the 50s, it really split into two groups. There's a lot of contemporary music where you have to be educated to hear it. And I understand that. And I love going to Disney Hall and hearing a modern music show, but I couldn't bring my kids or my family. They would just hate it. And I do feel I learned something. When my son, Oliver, was 4 years old, I played him a DVD of Michael Tilson Thomas doing The Rite of Spring with San Francisco Symphony. He was so infatuated with it that he wanted to hear it and watch it every day for a month. He called it the Rite of Spring. But the thing that I learned, and this is where Philip Glass comes into account, is that if music comes from a certain place, if it has some tonality, if it's rhythmically doing something that Stravinsky did something that a 4-year-old can listen to. It takes absolutely no understanding of what it is to capture your imagination. It's so emotional, it's so visceral, and that is the best form for me. And Mozart, when he wrote, they were writing for everybody. They weren't writing for a rarefied audience. I feel that music can still be written for a wider audience that's not so rarefied, even though I have an appreciation and occasionally love to go into, I think the piece I write for the youth orchestra will be pretty insane because there are 165 kids that just want to go insane. And so I will oblige them. But Philip Glass and John Adams are two composers who entered the 20th century with a sense of rhythmic-based music that even if you don't understand what they're doing, you can still listen to it and get it. My son could listen to. I was very much inspired by the music of Pauana Coetzee and I'm sorry I say that wrong, Koyana Scotzi and thank you. And in fact, Pauakatsi, if you listen to that, you'll hear influences of that in so much of my writing. It was just like one of those events for me, like here when I heard The Rite of Spring. So this is just amazing music, and anybody can listen to it, but it's totally new and it's totally fresh. Again, there was a lesson. So when I was touring with the Elfman Burton show, I saw we were bringing these big audiences, very enthusiastic, in to hear film music. And now film music concerts are really big. But then I would go to Disney Hall, and I would see the concerts, and sitting in the balcony, I see a lot of white hair. I see my own age, and I'm going, there's nothing wrong with that, but I want to write the film audiences tend to be a much younger, more energetic audience. And I go, where's this disconnect? They should all be together. There should be like young and old being able to listen to things. And I started to want to write for both audiences, and that became my goal. To write something, if you're a film music fan, there's enough rhythm and tonality to be able to like go, oh wow, this is like not what I'm used to hearing Danny do, but I get it and I'm into it. It still evokes imagery, I hope, like, to me, good classical contemporary music does. But if you're a classical listener, it's not like, oh, I'm hearing a film score. You don't feel like, I hope that they're being written down to. So that was my goal going into it. I'm not saying I achieved either, but my motivation came from wanting to join those two worlds if it were possible.
Sorry, I have to share the mic. So we're going to get kicked out of here in about 1 minute by our cruel harpist who needs to tune. You wrote for the harp. She needs to tune it. I just want to, we didn't get to any of the examples, but there you go, you know, enjoy. I sounded great. I'd like to just say thank you very much for this, bringing this piece into the world. It's been a pleasure working on it this week. I hope I get to play it again very soon. My personal favorite is the third movement. Would you just just literally 1 minute and tell us why this 4-note motive is so special?
Well, it's because it's a 4-note motive. I've always been fascinated by the idea of just taking a real simple motif and what can you do around it. Now that's something I've done on and off in film music for ages, taking really simple line, 4, 5 notes, 6 notes, sometimes 3, and then doing harmonics and chords around it. How far can you take it? And that became my biggest challenge, actually. I mean, I shouldn't say my biggest. The biggest challenge was writing, you know, for the violin. You know, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I don't know how much time I spent on the concerto, but it was